All right, it's the digital prisoner coming at you here. They're chasing me down right now. I'm trying to get away so I can tell you some of this information the government doesn't want you to know. Oh, all right. Oh, they got choppers now. Ah, oh, there we go. I think I lost them for a moment. All right, so here to tell you about types of government. All right, so just like, for instance, cars can be classified in various ways. So if you look right here at these pictures, you can see, you could say let's classify it by convertible or not. All of these are convertible. Let's classify them by color. You'd have these that are red, these that are blue. Let's do it by years they were made, and you could change them up, and you'd have some old cars, and you'd have some new ones. Um, you could classify it in a lot of different ways. The maker, or um, what country it's from. So there's a lot of ways to classify cars. Just like there are ways to classify cars, there are ways to classify governments. Okay, the first way that we're going to talk about is who. Okay, one way is who has the power. Now, the two that we're going to look at is a democracy or a dictatorship. Okay, democracy is a form of government in which people rule, usually through voting. And democracy was formed back in Athens, in ancient Greece. Um, and there are various forms of democracy that we'll talk about here in just a minute. A dictatorship is a form of government in which all of the power is held by either one person or a few people. So look at your government and think, which one do you live in? Um, if you're here in America, your type of government is democracy. But what type of democracy? Okay, dictatorships. Most governments in history have been some form or another of dictatorships, and you can think of some, various popular ones throughout, or maybe not popular, but well-known ones throughout history. Hitler. Um, Go further back, you can look at the emperors of Rome, or your emperors of Japan or China. Um, and so throughout most of history, you've had somebody who is ruling in charge, like your pharaohs. And if you have one person who has all the power, that is known as an autocracy. Okay? That is one person who holds all the power. Now, if there are a handful of people who have power, like a small group, that is known as an oligarchy. Okay? An oligarchy. And this is where there's a group of people, who will hold the power. That can be, you know, a larger group, but as long as it's small to, the rest of the population. If there's, 50 people, I mean, that could still be an oligarchy, or you could have an oligarchy of 5 people. Okay, now democracies. Two main types of democracy. There's direct democracy or an indirect or representative democracy. Direct democracy is the type that was formed back in Athens originally. It's a form of government in which all of the people say how the government works. These usually only work in small governments like city-states or local governments, because everybody has a say-so in everything. And then you have your indirect or representative democracy. And this is a form of government in which elected representatives make all of the decisions. So everybody votes on a representative who then makes the choices about what's going to be made, about certain laws, and about how money is going to be spent, and so forth. So what form of government do you think you have? And again, here we have a representative democracy because we elect senators and representatives, president, mayor, governor, whoever, we elect these people to represent us in office and make the decisions for us, so that we don't go vote on every little law or every little thing that has to be passed. Another way to classify governments is how much. Um, and again, it's dealing with power. How much power do they have? Totalitarian. This is a government that has, kind of like it says, um, has total power. It has all the power. And it tries to advance a particular ideology. Now, ideology is a set of beliefs or on economic, social, or government issues, or it could be all of them. But they choose a certain ideology and they push that ideology. An example of a totalitarian government would be Cuba. Um, and there's no room. They have total power. There's no room for anybody else to have power, and they push their specific agenda um, and ideology. Authoritarian. And now this is a government that is very strong and it has a lot of power, but it's not total power. Okay. Then you have limited. It's a government that has some, but not all of the power. And this can be in various degrees. They don't have as much as authoritarian, but they still have a fair amount. Or it could be down to where they have very little amount. It's a wide ranging when you discuss limited government. And then there's anarchy. It's a government that pretty much doesn't exist. When most people think anarchy, they think chaos. Oh my God, it's anarchy! Ah! So you never know what's going to happen. Um, that's where you hear people, it's anarchy here. Oh my goodness. Um, but anarchy is still considered a form of government, just one that there's really not much government going on. Donde? Where? Where is the power located? Um, Unitary. Okay, this is the power is centralized in one location. This is the most common in the world. Okay, all the power is located in one place. They rule from this capital, and that's it. That's where all the power. If you blew up this place, you destroyed all the power in that country or um, in that government. Then you have federal. Power is divided between central and smaller, more localized governments. There's a division of power between the two. Usually, the central government has more power, and then the smaller, more localized governments have a substantial amount of power, but not as much as the central one that can override the smaller ones. And then the confederate. And then the power is divided equally among an association of states. So, which are you? Okay, if you answered that you are federal, you are correct. The power is divided between our central government, uh, our federal government, which is centered there in Washington, D.C., and it spreads out to all of the states. Each state then spreads that out to all your local cities and so forth. There's a division of power. And then the final way that we're going to discuss is como, how. How is this power distributed? Governments are made up of branches or divisions. Here, we currently have 3 branches. But we're going to discuss how these branches exist together. In a parliamentary form of government, the executive branch is composed of members from the legislative branch. So you have to be in the legislative branch in order to make it into the executive branch. You also have the presidential form. And in this one, the legislative and executive branches are separate. And they have a checks and balances on each other, which means that they are able to keep each other from getting too far or too much of the power. Um, and if here in America we have uh, the judicial branch as well as our legislative and executive branch, and they all do have a check and balances on each other. We are under the presidential. All right, so finally, we'll talk about a few American ideas of democracy. What makes American democracy uh, its own? Individual worth. Everybody believes that everybody is worth something. Well, not everybody believes this, but it's the belief that everybody is worth something. Nobody is worth nothing. Okay, everybody has worth to them. Individual freedom, that everybody has the freedom to do what they want until it infringes upon someone else's right to do what they want or break some laws. Okay, equality. That everyone is equal. No one is more important than another. Popular sovereignty. That the government rules by the consent of the people. That unless the people consent for the government to rule, they shall not rule. I'm not sure, how much popular sovereignty is anymore. There's a lot of people who are always upset with the government. But if enough people got upset with it, they could then overthrow the government. Look at what the Declaration of Independence tells us. That it is not only your right but responsibility that if the government no longer meets the needs of the people, then it is the people's, responsibility to throw off that said government. So, this country was founded on popular sovereignty. Majority rule, that, what the majority want goes. So if most of the people, majority, you can have a simple majority which is over, uh, just over half. Like, so if we have 100 people, 51 would be a simple majority. Um, and that's what this is more referring to, that the majority of people would rule. Whatever they want goes. So if 51 out of the 100 people want to eat pizza versus hamburgers for dinner, well, then if pizza is what we're having. All right, minority rights. That even though the minority don't get to choose the rules, they still have rights. So let's say somebody in that scenario we just said is allergic to mushrooms. Well, the pizza that we buy is not going to have mushrooms on it because we are not going to infringe on his right to live by feeding him mushrooms. Oh, you must eat the mushrooms! uh, so, limited government. That the government will have power to do what is necessary, but will not infringe upon the rights of its citizens. Um, and this is an example of how ranging limited government is. America started out with a very limited limited government and has increased to a very high limited government. Nowadays we're on the high end of that limited government spectrum where we started out on that low end because the government continually infringes upon rights and does a lot of things limiting what you can and cannot do. Compromise. There's a lot of compromises that we'll mention throughout this course. The Great Compromise being one, the Three-Fifths Compromise, and so forth, that founded this country. And you continue to have compromise throughout. Though sometimes if you watch the news, it doesn't seem like the government is ever willing to compromise. So, do all these things sound like your government? Some do, some don't. There's the thing about the American government is it's constantly changing. It's a living, breathing document, is what they call the Constitution, if we ever follow it anymore. But there are a lot of room for change from what our government is founded on. And some of this comes and goes and ebbs and flows. And we'll discuss a lot of that throughout this year. So until next time, deuces!